Hi, I'm Lainey Mays. I work for the library marketing team at HarperCollins Publishers, and I'm very excited because we have a special video for you today. We're joined with Jessica Williams, VP Editorial Director for Fiction at William Morrow, and the editor of Killer Potential, and we're joined by the author Hannah Deitch. It's a really special day for us, and we'll tell you more about that, but I'm going to let Jessica introduce the author.
So this is Hannah, the author of Killer Potential, who I think you will all be hearing a lot more about in the coming months and before her amazing debut novel, goes on sale in March.
Woohoo! So, kind of the background behind why we're doing this, because this is our lead read for the season. That's a program where the sales force gets behind a book, we all vote, and this one blew us all away. The comments, I've seen them. They go on for a long time. And so I read that for the lead read, and I could not stop talking about it to anyone who walked by. And so I think we were in office, and I was like, that ending, I need to talk to someone right now. And so we started talking. And I think people around us were like, well, why aren't you talking?
I think we were having like an argument.
We might have been having a loving argument.
Yes, it's one of those arguments where you forget the characters are fictional.
Right.
And you're like, no, that is not, what her intentions were with that. And then you thought,
character.
Yes, the characters, exactly. And we had a very fun and lively disagreement about our interpretations of the ending.
Yes.
And then I think you all had the great idea of inviting Hannah to ALA, which she won't stop talking about.
Oh, good.
It was awesome. It was amazing.
Good. Yeah. There's a good energy there.
Yeah. It was a very like friendly first experience for
it's the best crowd.
Yeah, like an event like that. It was amazing. Yeah. And I was just happy so many people were there to chat.
Yeah. Well, we've been talking about it, so they were very excited. You signed in the booth. So the ALA is the American Library Association. You came, most people watching this know, but just in case you don't, we had you sign in the booth, but you also did a mystery thriller program. Mm-hmm. So you got to talk a little bit. Was that the first time you talked to people about the book?
Definitely.
That's wild.
Yeah, and it was like a pretty packed room.
It was.
And I remember I went first, which I wasn't expecting to also, but it was kind of nice because I kind of just got to like get it over with.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it was awesome.
Good.
Yeah.
I'm so glad. So we met, and I was like, so we had this loving argument, and we need to all three sit down and talk about this. And Jessica's really good to come on many of our videos, so I knew you'd be down. And
yes, I've done the OG videos.
Yes,
I've been around.
Yeah. And so I want to talk a little bit about the background of getting the book, your first time with the book, your experience with this book deal. So I guess I'll let you kind of take that away.
Yeah. Well, I remember, we get pitched a lot of books as editors, as you can imagine. But the agent specifically said, I have not repped a thriller since The Other Black Girl. And I just signed this up, and she was like, sometimes you can just tell the passion that's like radiating out of the agent when they're telling you about it. And I think it was sent to me on a Thursday, and Friday I needed to edit, so I wasn't reading it yet, but I started getting emails from people being like, from the agent being like, everybody's reading it. And then from friends of mine who were like, oh my God, have you read this book yet? And so I started reading it over the weekend. And I can't even use the language because this book is so effing good. And then I started reading it over the weekend, and I just had so much fun.
Yeah.
It was just really, really fun. Off to the races. The voice pulled me in immediately. I just found this character, Evie Gordon, which I think we should have you kind of give a little setup of the book so people have a sense of it. She just pulled me in immediately. And then I related to her, even though the situation is crazy. Like absolutely crazy, like if something like that ever happened to you. But you see how she's kind of like an every woman like thrown into an extraordinary situation. So before you dive into like what that experience was like from your side, I'd just be curious, like can you give people like just a little quick setup of the story?
Yeah.
And then I think from there, what it was like for you to having written this novel, then start to experience that, interest from the other side.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So the novel is about Evie Gordon. She is a former gifted student who did not find the success that she sort of had bought into, as far as like, you know, the American dream and all of that kind of promised her. And so she is currently working as an SAT tutor. She's been doing that for a really long time. And then through a series of insane events, mainly finding one of her students' parents murdered in their own house. And then quickly after that, a kidnapped woman, she is forced to become a fugitive. So yeah, that part of the story.
That's chapter 1.
Like, yeah, that's
That's chapter 1.
Like classic inciting incident. But yeah, as far as being kind of on the other side of all the interest, to be honest, it was such a, like, I feel like it's such a cliche to say roller coaster, but because it was so crazy and it was so not at all what I was expecting, it was weirdly easy to go through, because I was like, this isn't real. This is just, yeah.
You thought it was like someone was Truman showing you or something?
I was like actively just like repressing and compartmentalizing everything as it was happening, because it just didn't, I literally, this is like psychotic of me to admit, but I literally at one point Googled like how to accept good news. Like I was that.
What were the tips?
It was like, go to therapy. Like, you know, this is, it,
okay,
well,
it was really good.
I mean, it was also like Hannah talked to 17 different editors just in New York. So she had to have a lot of conversations over a very short time frame. I was only one of those conversations. And then there was all the UK editors she had to talk to. And then after talking to the US and the UK, she then had to start talking to film people. And that was how many conversations?
It was like 21.
21 conversations. So like,
okay, that is surreal. I get
a little bit of
but
a whirlwind,
and you had been similar to Evie, someone who, I mean, it's terrible to say, you were kind of overeducated and working a lot of bad gig jobs.
Yes,
like you had already done a double master's degree, and were working on a PhD.
2 master's degrees. I was working on a PhD. I was working full time.
And I think maybe you need to give them the setup of what inspired you to write this novel about an SAT tutor and how you were feeling when the idea came to you.
Yeah. So I was kind of between projects, and I was just like extremely overworked. I was working full time, and it was like a very, very like time consuming job. I was pursuing a PhD, and like even with all of that, I was like really struggling to make rent. I mean, I lived in San Francisco, so that was part of it, but like in a crappy tiny studio. And I hadn't tutored in probably like 3 years up to that point. And before that, that had been like a job that was sort of like a mainstay. It's just like gig work I kept going back to. But I thought like, okay, I've been out of it for 3 years. I'll probably never have to go back. And I did. I didn't actually pull the trigger on it, I think, but I was like actively applying, I think, and interviewing. And then I had this like kind of chaotic Word document where anytime I would get like an idea for a novel or anything like that, I would just sort of like scribble down the notes. And one day I was like in the middle of applying for these jobs, and I wrote down like SAT tutor, works for rich family, finds dead bodies, and kidnapped woman. The notes of like a crazy person. Like no one should ever look at that document. But
well, look what it created.
Yeah,
so there you go.
I was, and I like part of that idea was also the like the reveal of the whodunit and all of that. Like it was a complete thought, and so I was like, oh, there actually feels like there's something here. And I started working on it like pretty much immediately, and did not go back to tutoring, which was.
When you were writing it, though, I feel like we've been talking a lot about it as like this is like a Thelma and Louise story for the 21st century. But when you were writing it, were you thinking about it under those terms, or was it just coming to you, and then looking back, you kind of realized what you like this, this fugitive story within this genre of like classic American outlaw stories?
Yeah, it's so fun. I really wasn't thinking of it actually in any kind of like tradition of like an outlaw story or anything like that. I was just sort of like pursuing this idea kind of in a vacuum. And then I think it was my agent who first was like, it's a Thelma and Louise story. And I was like, well, I love Thelma and Louise, so that makes total sense that was like something I clearly in my subconscious was thinking about, but it wasn't like conscious while I was working on it.
Well, such a big part is the cross-country chase, which I feel like, well, I mean, it's like multiple across the country and different countries. And so how did you keep that momentum going when you were writing? Like, did you have the stops thought out, or you kind of like, they'd go here next?
Oh, she did not have the stops thought out.
No, I definitely didn't. I'm not an outliner, as Jessica knows very well. I very much like just write chronologically.
Okay.
So I like to write like a pretty polished like first draft, but I'm just like doing it scene by scene. And then I feel like at a certain point you do sort of start looking like ahead a little bit. But yeah, I mean, the middle changed a lot.
A lot.
Yeah, it did change quite a bit. But I've been on a lot of, I love like driving. I love road tripping. I've done a lot of them. I've done a lot of like cross country ones. So it was pretty easy to come up with stuff because the like main route that they go on, which I was thinking of as sort of like Interstate 10, I've done like multiple times. So I kind of knew like, yeah, it wasn't too difficult to like think of where they would go. But I had Google Maps up like constantly, just looking at like, okay, they could go here, they could go here. But yeah, it wasn't planned.
Well, doing it stop by stop probably adds to this like, what's gonna happen next? So it kind of works with narrative.
Yeah, like they don't know where they're going. Yeah.
There was a lot of hanging out in hotel rooms in the early draft, and I was like, we need to get them out of the hotel room.
Yeah, those became repetitive. Yeah,
Yes.
So they go to different places.
Yes.
Yeah, they find creative shelter. Yeah,
But with the manuscript that I read on submission, I would say the opening, like first third, we barely touched.
Yeah.
And
like the first act
and
of it.
And probably the last third, we made some minor kind of tweaks to the approach to it, but all of the beats are the same. It was more just how to, I think most novels struggle with how to keep the story moving in the middle.
Yeah.
And so that was what we were really focusing on.
Yeah, the middle changed a lot. Yeah.
That makes sense. Yeah. Well, to go back to tutoring a little, I was going to say at ALA, I feel like when you did your event, the main thing people really attach to, and I don't know if it has to do with like a job that maybe you don't want to be doing, I don't know, but everyone was like, I had this terrible tutoring gig. So I don't know if you have any stories.
Yes, horror stories.
I mean, to be honest, a lot of them are in the book.
Okay.
That I've
Well, not the
like
finding two dead bodies.
I hope not.
Yeah, not that part. Not that part. Just like the bratty parents and children. Yeah, just like really, really wealthy families. No dead bodies or kidnapped women. That's good.
Cute.
But yeah, a lot of real stuff that I experienced, I just sort of like anonymized, and hopefully those families never find themselves in. Honestly, they're not self-aware enough to see themselves, so I think that they probably wouldn't. But I had a parent once who, it was mostly parents, like the kids are like, you know, even if they're incredibly wealthy, like they're normally well behaved. You're a teacher too, and you're like coming into their house, so they're like normally kind of behaving. But I had some parents who would just like really I don't know, just act like extremely entitled. A woman like thought I was like 2 hours late for some reason and just like screamed at me for like 10 minutes.
I'm 2 hours and 10 minutes late. So.
Yeah, I literally. Yeah, like what? Now you're just wait, like, you know, clock's ticking. Like, yeah, I had a dad once who was the father of this girl who was like really terrible at math, and he pulled me aside afterwards and was like, "She's adopted." Like, just to make it clear, there was like no genetic relationship. Yeah, some really interesting parents that I
Wow. Well, that gives you a good taste of all the tutoring stories in this book.
For as much as this book is like incredibly fun to read, I think one thing that is so satisfying about it is just how smart it is in its social commentary, especially when it comes to class, working bad jobs. We talked a little bit about this idea of like lifting yourself up by your bootstraps and how to make it in America. And Evie is definitely someone who was sort of told from a young age that she has so much potential. She's in all the talented and gifted classes. So she's like built up this idea in her head, coming like being a straight A scholarship kid, that she's going to be someone really special when she grows up. And then she's like broke, working bad jobs, you know, like similar to kind of what I think you experienced.
Yeah.
But did you know as you were writing the novel that you wanted to bring in all of this kind of social commentary about like what it is like to try to make it in America these days?
That was a huge part of the kind of, I think it was like when I knew this was actually a book and not just sort of like an idea for a book, was because I thought as soon as I kind of had the idea for the opening premise of the novel, I did also know what I wanted the ending to be. So like even though I don't outline, I did like I had the kind of whole shape of it, and I thought that it would be a really kind of a perfect vessel to talk about so many of the things that had been really on my mind for quite a long time, because I think, you know, it's a millennial character. It's a character who's saddled with tons of student loan debt. You know, she's kind of a character who's a part of a generation who's been like far less successful than all the generations before her. It's like on this downward trend. She is like a classic kind of millennial character. She's extremely overeducated, but also like will probably never own a house. Like she's working extremely hard, and just like not going anywhere. And I think I was really, really strongly feeling that kind of like existential dread. That was like a lifeboat I feel like I personally had been clinging to for a really long time, that I had finally kind of like let go of. And I think also it's just like it just felt like such an urgent, it's something I'm thinking about constantly. I think it's something a lot of my friends are thinking about constantly. Like an entire younger generations are sort of like clawing at this cliff face, and also being like gaslit by like kind of our mainstream culture like all the time, because I think for whatever reason like stories about what's happening economically are often only being talked about in terms of like the stock market or kind of these really general like unemployment statistics, as if that's the only like qualitative data we have on like the health of like an entire country's like economy. Right. And I will always want there to be more stories about money, specifically from the perspective of people who don't have it, like that, which is like surprisingly an increasingly rare thing. But something that, I mean, it was just like so urgent in my daily life. And I think it's so urgent in most people's daily lives. And that's how it became like kind of the story of this book in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I think that also contributes to, I thought that was so well done in this book, especially like first generation college kids and like doing everything right, but not getting that outcome. And so I think that feeds also into what you say in the like author's note, which is in the front of the galley, but also on Edelweiss, so librarians can go check it out. But you say that you really were interested in recasting traditional heroes and villains and like, you know, these societal structures that could make and change that. So I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about the line that separates those two, and if you think someone can be both.
That's such a good question. Yeah, I mean, I think the thing about so many, I guess a big thing that I was thinking about was like heroes in culture are often just the character sort of most aligned with like the status quo or like maintaining the status quo. And on the other side of that are villains who are often just sort of like conflated with criminals, as if there's like a one-to-one kind of relationship between them. But like if the laws are bad or if they're protecting,
we should break them.
People who are like hoarding wealth or, you know, doing bad things, like maybe we just flip that around. That was something I was thinking about a lot.
Well, and one thing in the novel that we spent quite a bit of time talking about is like how long does it take to become the thing that they labeled you as? Yeah. And so we have Evie in the opening chapter. She stumbles across these dead bodies. She didn't do it. She's innocent. The reader knows she's innocent. She finds this kidnapped woman who we should talk about. And then they go on the run as fugitives. But if you are broke on the run as a fugitive, how long until you start committing crimes to survive?
Yeah.
And that was that sort of like slippery slope that we,
Absolutely.
I think, had a lot of fun with thinking about in the novel.
And it's like, I liked the idea of, I mean, the like narrative engine of the book is like these financial urgencies. It's like, we got to get food. We have to get to this. We have to get a new car. Like we have, you know, they're just like moving forward with,
And it's also like cops who are chasing them, and the news media goes crazy over these rich people who were murdered in LA, of course.
Yeah, eventually there's like a reward out for them. So yeah, they're gonna resort to some unsavory things because they have to. It's like survival. And yeah, that was, I think it does become kind of a really big part of like the suspense of the book is also just like, how will they do it? Like, how will they survive?
And will they? Well, one thing I feel like this ties into that I know I always got a kick out of hearing from you was how you went about your research and how worried you were about your Google search based on the research that you did for this novel. I mean, you are trying to get them across the border. So maybe you want to speak a little bit about
I mean, I'm definitely on like just multiple FBI watch lists, like absolutely.
It's okay. We can like tag this video and it'll come first. So if they're like, how did you want to know
It's just for
these?
a book. That's all. Yeah, she didn't do any of these things. Yeah, at one point, I was really there was like an abandoned thing where I thought I needed to know a lot about Canadian drug runners.
Oh.
Okay. So that's fun. So that's in my search history.
The novel at all.
Not
okay, well I can't help you with that one.
It's not. Yeah, that's true.
Well, and you were looking at like best routes across the border.
Oh yeah.
Which ones have cameras?
Really, like deep diving. Yeah, there was this whole part where there used to be a different way that they get across the border. And when we were like editing through that process, and we were kind of coming up certain obstacles, I was like, well, actually, they can't do that because there will be thermal cameras there, which I know now.
Because of all of my research.
I also did tons of research on carjacking. I'm convinced
the carjacking.
Steal just about any car I want.
I was thinking about you recently because of all the Kia boys.
Oh, I've seen all those TikToks. Yeah, I've seen.
I don't know about this.
So in the novel, they have to steal certain brands and certain years of cars because they're easy to break into. Yes, but on TikTok, there's this big thing where I guess these kids know how to steal Kias.
I think it was during COVID, and teenagers were stealing Kias and like just showing exactly
how easy
they do it, which was great for me. Yeah, there's
Thank
like
you too.
I know there's like a whole YouTube community of like people showing you how to steal cars, and I've seen them all. So,
yeah,
that's wild. Oh my goodness. Well, going back to what you said about the other character in the book, do we want to talk about Jay?
Yes. Yeah, tell us about, I'd be curious, like, what was your original inspiration for Jay? What did you want? Like, you said a kidnapped woman, but was that it when the idea came to you?
It's a kidnapped woman, and, I mean, Jay's like our second lead character. So in the kind of the Thelma and Louise of it all, it is another duo, but unlike that, it's a person, it's our main character, and then this person who's like a perfect stranger to them, who also is under the circumstances we find Jay, she's like tied up in a closet inside their house. So Evie, our main character, has no idea what happened to her, and it's seems pretty obvious that the Victor family, who is the family that have kidnapped her theoretically, have done some pretty terrible things to her. And Jay is totally mute for a really big part of the book. So that adds like another layer of mystery to the novel, because it's like, what has happened to this girl on top of who has killed this family? Those two things like certainly seem like related to each other. But as they kind of go on their journey together, Jay also has a lot of really useful
criminal knowledge.
Yeah. Some street smarts that Evie could really use. Because Evie really just knows how to like do math and read, and doesn't know how to steal cars.
Solve for X,
exactly. Yeah, she's never picked a pocket. But Jay Jay does, and that turns out to be really useful for her. So yeah, their skills, they're bringing different things to the table, basically.
To their partnership. It's hard to talk about Jay or their relationship because there's so much that you have to sort of discover as you read.
I think that's
but
true.
I really love their relationship on the road. I mean, I love their whole relationship, the whole novel. But just in terms of like the dynamic when Jay isn't speaking and how much Evie is obsessed with this idea that if she just solves the case that none of these other cops or the news media has solved, that she will be able to just go back to her old life, which she didn't even really like. But she is like, oh, I wish I could go back to my old life.
That's probably the seductive part, right?
Yeah.
Being on the road, like, well, what do I have to go back to?
Yeah.
But Jay seems less inclined to want to go back.
Yeah.
There is a great scene where they go to a library because they don't have access to cell phones or the internet or the TV. Like, they got rid of.
They're off the grid.
They're off the grid.
She
so
throws her phone out the window
library.
Like,
What made you think? Well, you're like, well, how can they need to access the internet and say something to the library?
I mean, it just seemed like the most like practical thing I think for them to do because obviously they can't have a phone. They immediately get rid of that. Like they're in really crappy motels. They're not going to like the business center, you know. So they find a public library, and that is how they finally are able to get access to some information about what's happening with the case, because it's the other thing that's like driving Evie crazy is she's on the run, but she also has no information about like where are the cops kind of at, where do they think we are any journalists like finding out any other information that she's just looking for like a lifeboat of hope, I think, more than anything. But yeah, the library is pretty pivotal in that part of her journey for sure.
Although I don't think any librarians would say yes, killers come on in. But I think
everyone is welcome in the public library.
They definitely know the importance of research, privacy, and free access to technology. So it's a perfect place.
You thought at all, Hannah, like it's early days, like people are just starting to like, read your novel.
Right.
And I know all of the things that you thought about when you were writing it, but like have you thought about what is the thing you want readers to take away from Killer Potential?
That's a great question. I mean, I think that it's probably the class thing was like the most urgent thing on my mind, just because I do feel like there are never kind of enough books that are approaching that from the angle of the kind of position most of us are in. Like there's always so many novels and TV shows and movies about really, really wealthy people that are often very good and have a lot of like funny satire and things like that. But I do think I am always looking for more stories that are about characters who are working multiple jobs and really kind of struggling to make ends meet, but not in a kind of like trauma porny way, which is how I think it can often be, or just really kind of like humorless and sober and homeworky.
This book is surprisingly funny. Like, I feel like it's inappropriate to read any of the lines like this. It's like filled with like, there's a lot of like anger, but in a really fun way, where we were talking before this about how I have like a favorite lines doc and it's like 5 pages long because there are so many just like zingers in this novel, and so it's like very fun and sharp, even though it makes you think in this way. And I also think it is quite rare, like what you're talking about, that fiction uses money as a motivator. It's, a lot of times, they're motivated by these other things, but money just, they seem to have it. Yeah. But in your novel, it's also about fiction, or as money as a motivator for when it comes to crime. And how much some people under, their circumstances don't have a lot of other options available to them.
Yeah. Money is like a narrative. And I think money is like a mystery. Like it like literally is kind of a mystery to Evie because she doesn't come from that, and so she's looking around at people who are kind of in her same maybe peer group or people she might have like graduated from college with and going like, they have a house? Like how'd that happen? Or like I thought they were just working all these unpaid internships. Like how did they get at this position? And it's like, well, and she's kind of confronting like inherited wealth in real time. It was funny to think about money being like the other kind of mystery of this book of just like how do some people have it and some do not.
Right. I was really drawn in by this like dark sultry or like sardonic maybe. Like there's this satire in there a little because, well, maybe not satire, but like it is really funny. And I think that there's so much to dive into and I was so drawn to it. I know you've edited books like Notes on an Execution and My Dark Vanessa, like these like dark like layers to dive into, but all told in this like really thrilling element. And I think this just has this perfect package of this cross-country chase, but there's just so many layers in there. I think book clubs are going to be coming to this. So I think it'd be perfect for the library in that case. Like there's a, privilege, money. I also like who's deserving of love, which I want to go back to this question, which is it a love story? I think this is a really good question. And I think to let you know, we don't want to reveal anything, but part of the reason we were having our conversation that led to this.
We disagree on that.
I mean, it's a hard one to answer in like a non-spoilery way.
I see. Yeah, it's hard.
Yeah. I mean, I think it is. Yeah. But I do think it's very, very complicated. Like it's very totally thorny once the like full like structure of the book reveals itself. Yeah. There are like secrets kind of up until the very last page, like truly. It's
I'm like ride or die team Jay and Evie. Like, I don't care who they killed, what they did, like it doesn't, I'm like, I don't care about any of that. It's a love story. She did not think it was.
No, I'm not going to give anything away, but I think that they like, I understand what they think of each other, and I totally get that. Yeah. Outside scares me, but it is a thriller, so that's the way. But I think they truly think that.
I think it's totally available to that too. Yeah.
And that's what you did such a good job with, showing every side and me being like, oh, okay, I get it. I get both sides. So that tells you. I will say I opened it today on the train because I was like, I'm going to read the last few pages, kind of get like in the mindset, read it again. I almost missed my stop again because I know what happens and I still want to know.
I can't even tell you how many times I opened this book to was like, I'm just going to dip in and get a sense of the voice again, as I'm working on something. And then I'm like, I read 100 pages.
It's,
love hearing that. That's amazing.
Well, is there anything else you want to talk about before we wrap up?
Any advice for aspiring writers out there?
Oh my gosh.
Don't be an SAT tutor.
Yeah, well.
Or do.
Man, could work out.
Good fodder for fiction.
I think write the thing that you feel most, like urgent about. Because this book, as we said at the beginning, like I kind of wrote it in a vacuum, expecting very little. And it turned out that there was a market for it, which is really cool. Yeah. I was really just kind of writing the things I was thinking about the most. I don't know how kind of like translatable that is for other people, I guess. But write the thing that like, you're the story you're just like burning to write. Yeah.
I love that. Well, thank you, Hannah. Thank you, Jessica.
Thank you, Lainey, for having us.
Oh, this has been truly a delight. I love this book so much. The book, Killer Potential, comes out in March. You can get an e-galley on Edelweiss and NetGalley now. And if you're voting for Library Reads, February 1st is the deadline. Thank you.